So welcome to the today's session. Today it is day number 8. So approximately 50% of the of this block is completed. Approximately 50% of the classes are going to be completed today. Half of the sprint is remaining. It will also, that pass so fast. Okay. Yesterday, let me actually open the content. What exactly we have covered yesterday. In yesterday's content, initially, actually, I was talking to you about some of the basic things like I discussed to you what is the use of every method is. Post method is used for create, read method. When you wanted to perform the read operation, then go for the get method. When you wanted to perform the update operation, then go for the put or patch operation. For the delete, definitely delete mapping is available there. If there is a major update available, then for the major update, always go for put request. If it is a minor update, then go for the patch request. REST API convention is also what I discussed to you. So whenever actually you are going to create the endpoints, keep in mind that the endpoints are always created into the plural, and in the REST API, you can actually use the common or the same URL for the 4 different type of request. Means the same URL can serve for the get request, for the post request, for the put request, for the patch request, as well as for the delete request. So you have to remember less number of URLs. Then response body annotation. Regarding the response body annotation, I told you one thing, that the response body annotation is responsible for converting the Java object into the JSON object. If you wanted to use response body annotation on a single method, then you can. If you wanted to apply the same for the entire controller, then we have to use REST controller annotation. Then it was all about passing information to the server. If we wanted to pass information to the server, then multiple things are available there. One of the thing is available by mean of URI parameter. Second thing is available by mean of the query string. And the third thing is available, that is by mean of request body. Third thing is available, that is by mean of the request body. Thereafter, everyone, whenever actually something is available in the form of URL variables or the path variable, at the rate path variable annotation is applicable. And if the URI variable name and the method parameter name both are same, in this condition, nothing to do. But if they are different, then actually you have to specify the name of the path variable within the double quotation mark, or you have to use value attribute to perform the mapping. There can be any number of path variables available. If you wanted to handle multiple number of path variables, then definitely you can create a map also. The map actually store information in the form of key value pair, where key is going to be the variable name and value is going to be whatever be the variable available there. So these are the few approaches that are available. Apart from that, we had taken discussion about the differences also. I talked to you about the query string also. If we wanted to get something in the query string, then we have to use @request param annotation. But use of @request param annotation is not compulsory. If it is primitive value, if it is string value, if it is local date value. So definitely, if you are not writing @request param, still there is no problem. Comparison was also something we have taken into the consideration. Then finally, everyone, I was talking to you about the request body annotation. The request body annotation is responsible for converting the, you can say that request body annotation, it is responsible for converting the JSON object into the Java object. It is used to convert the JSON object into the Java object. So simple thing is that there, everyone, we have used this annotation also in case of the post mapping. Then we were talking about the difference between the put and the patch. Overall summarization is that when actually we are having major number of updates, then go for the put request. When we are having minor number of updates, then go for the patch request. And actually put request require a lot of bandwidth, but definitely the patch request require very less amount of bandwidth. Then finally, I was talking to you about returning the response. And when we are talking about the returning the response, then definitely to return the response, we have to take care about one thing. Initially, we were actually returning all the response in the form of a string. We were not taking care about HTTP headers. We were not taking care about the HTTP status. But at the last, I told you that whenever you are going to return a response, then definitely response should be according to the standard HTTP format. And a standard HTTP response contains status code. Apart from the status code, it is containing headers. And apart from the headers, it is containing one more thing that is called body. Now the question arises that how to actually create a proper HTTP response in the Spring. So if you are talking about creating a proper HTTP response in the Spring, then in this condition, you should follow some pointers. What is the mean of some pointers? Like if I'm talking about the very first pointer, then we should always actually use the object of response entity class. Yesterday, when I discussed to you about the response entity class, then one thing I told you that response entity class is a subclass of HTTP entity class. The HTTP entity class is a class that is representing that is representing HTTP header plus body, but it does not contain the status. HTTP entity actually it contains header plus body, but actually the status code is missing in case of the HTTP entity. As you can see that the same thing is already mentioned in the line number 26. The HTTP entity represent an HTTP request or response entity consisting of header and body, but not status code. Then the next thing, how to represent the HTTP headers. To represent the HTTP header, the very first thing that we have to keep into mind is the very first thing that actually we have to keep into mind is that the HTTP status is actually HTTP header is nothing but it's a key value pair. And whenever we are talking about the key value pair, then definitely we have to talk about map. Remember, whenever we are talking about key value pair, then always we have to discuss about map. So there is actually map interface available. Below the map interface, there is one more type of map available. The name of the map is called multi-map, multi-value map. As the name already specify, for a single key, you can store multiple values. And internally, as you can see here, actually it is doing nothing. The value is going to be definitely of the key is going to be definitely of type K. But if I'm talking about the value, then in case of the value, it does not contain a single value, but actually it is containing a list of values. But actually it is containing a list of values. Is that point okay? It is containing a list of values. So if I'm talking about the class that is HTTP headers class, then definitely you can see that the HTTP header class is just a subclass of object class that is not required to mention. And it is actually implementing the multi-value map interface. In case of the multi-value map interface, you can see that the key is also going to be of string type. And if we are talking about the value, then definitely value is also going to be of string type. Multiple different headers are already inbuilt. Additional header, whatever you wanted to use, definitely you can use these headers also. Finally, we were talking about the HTTP response entity class. And if we are talking about the HTTP response entity class, then the response entity class actually inherit the HTTP entity class, but the HTTP entity class is containing the header plus body. Response entity class says that I am containing header plus body plus HTTP status code. Is that okay? It is containing HTTP status code. Is that clear, everyone? So thereafter, extension of the HTTP entity that actually add the HTTP status code is here. Next thing is available https docs.spring.io spring framework /docs/current/java something HTTP status. For the HTTP status, yesterday we had taken into the discussion that it is nothing but actually a enum, and in that enum actually lot of constants are available there. One of the constant is available that is called okay. One of the constant is available that is actually called okay. If I'm talking about the okay, then definitely HTTP status code okay is available. If we are talking about the 201, then definitely the HTTP status code 201 is for the created. HTTP status 202 is available, that is for the accepted. Thereafter, we are talking about HTTP status 203. Then definitely HTTP status 203 is available for non-authoritative information. HTTP status 204 is available, that is for no response. 300 is for under process, 400 is for document error, 500 is available, that is for the internal server error. So that is all what we have taken into the discussion yesterday. If anybody wanted to ask anything, you are requested to ask your doubt. If everything is okay, then please write one on the chat. Please write one on the chat if everything is okay. That's nice. That's nice. That's nice. That's nice. Now, today I'm going to discuss with you about the next part, and the next part is all about exception handling. The next part is all about exception handling, how to handle the exception in case of Spring Boot. This is what exactly we are going to discuss. This is what exactly we are going to discuss. Control C, Control V, then we are talking about B21, SB201, example number 22, and then I'm talking about exception. Oh, EXCEP exception handling. Then everyone clicking on the copy. And after clicking on the copy, let me resolve the dependencies. Let me resolve the dependency. First of all, let me check what dependencies I am having. Starter web dependency is available, dev tool is available, test is available. So no additional dependency is there. First of all, pressing Alt plus F5, then I'm updating the project. I'm updating the project. Yeah, the project is updated. Maven dependency is available here. Maven dependency is available here. Okay, everyone, can you see that Tomcat embedded dependency is by default available with the Spring Web? Tomcat embed codependency is by default available. So that's why actually Tomcat is the default server whenever we are talking about the Spring Boot starter web. In case of Spring Boot starter web, always Tomcat dependency is available for us by default. If you wanted to configure the other server, you can. Not a big deal, but Tomcat alone is actually sufficient in most of the cases. Tomcat alone is sufficient in most of the cases. Then everyone, talking about the next thing. So see, I have copied the same project as it is, and while copying the same project, then I'm talking about the next part. The next part is going to be that is called 22 underscore exception handling. So if I'm talking about the exception handling in this case, then clicking on the continue. After clicking on the continue, then I'm talking about the first, let the application main method, nothing to do special. One of the classes available, the name of the class is student.java, nothing to change. And if I'm talking about the student controller.java, then in the student controller.java, I'm going to make minor changes. I'm going to make minor changes. See, REST controller annotation, it will be as it is. REST control annotation, it will be as it is. Next thing, the student controller class name is as it is. Student list variable, it is as it is. The post construct annotation is also as it is. I am not supposed to make any changes here. If I'm talking about the method that is called the get all student method, then get all student method is I will use shortly, not right now, but I will use. But mainly initially I'm concerned with the method. The name of the method is called student slash role method. And if I'm talking about the student slash role method, this method is used to return a student by roll number. If I'm talking about the URL, then the URL is going to be get space http colon double slash localhost 8080 slash student. And then we have to specify any integer value for the student roll number. Then one more thing is available that is called the get mapping. Into the get mapping, student slash role is available there. Get mapping slash student slash roll number is there. Public response entity student. Then we are talking about the get student by roll number. Then we are talking about the path variable, integer is there, role is there. Simple. Conventional way, right now this is not useful for us. Already I have mentioned the same thing into the yesterday's code. So using Stream API, first of all, I'm going to filter the student by the roll number. After filtering a student by the roll number, if the list dot size is 0, if the list dot size is 0, in this condition we are writing return new response entity. And actually you can see that instead of throwing an exception, yesterday I was actually returning a dummy object of the student, and along with this I was sending the status that is HTTP not found. Don't you think that it will be a better choice that we should throw the proper exception? Yes or no? If a student is not available for the given roll number, then instead of throwing the dummy student object, or instead of actually returning the dummy student object, it will be great if we should actually throw the proper exception. Yes, this is what actually we wanted to do. And here one thing is, everyone, post method, put method, then apart, if I'm talking about the get mapping for marking, then if I'm talking about the post mapping, then we are talking about the put mapping, patch mapping, and delete mapping. So these are the few mapping information that are actually not required in this example. Mainly I am concerned with the two examples. One of the thing that actually I am concerned with is going to be when I am going to throw some exception here. Okay, one more thing that I wanted to add. Normally, everybody, one architecture that I have already told you multiple times. The architecture that I have told you multiple times is that when we are going to create the controller, then definitely controller is available in a layer, and it is responsible for actually just mapping the request. If actually it wanted to perform some business logic, then definitely to perform the business logic, it should call the service layer. From the service layer, if it wanted to perform, let's say that some database related operation, then for the database related operation, it should actually call for the repository. If I'm talking about the repository layer, then to create the repository layer, we can use Hibernate also. Apart from that, we can use Spring Data JPA also. Spring Data JPA is something that we are going to discuss in the next sprint, that is sprint number 3. In the entire sprint number 3, we will discuss about the same. Then, so what actually the flow should be? The flow should be that we should create a controller in one package. We should create the service into another package. We should create repository into the separate package. Accordingly, if I'm talking about the exceptions, then definitely for the exceptions, also what should we do? For the exceptions, it will be actually good to create a separate package. Remember DAO pattern? Yes, it is. Okay. So if I'm talking about this part, then definitely in this condition, public response entity student get student by roll number is there. So first of all, today, what exactly I'm going to do, let's say that I'm in the mood to create a separate packages, and because this time I'm going to create the separate packages, so let me keep the main class into the parent package. Let me keep the main class into the parent package. The name of the parent package is called com.masaischool. Thereafter, I wanted to create the additional packages also. So the very first package that actually I am creating is, let's say I am writing com.masai.controller. Let's say I'm writing com.masai.controller, and this time I'm doing one job, that the student controller actually I am putting in here. The student controller actually I am putting in here into the controller package. Similarly, I'm going to create one more package. So let me create one more package. The name of the package that actually I'm writing is going to be com.masaischool. And the name of the package is, let's say I'm writing model, or you can call it DTO also, not a big deal. So this time, if I'm talking about the student class, then I have moved the student class here. I have moved the student class here. So everyone, now later on, if you wanted to add the service layer, if you wanted to add the repository layer, then definitely this type of architecture is better suitable. Yes or no? I'm creating one more package. The name of the package that I'm writing is com.masaischool.exception package. Into the com.masaischool.exception package, I'm going to create a class, and the name of the class that I'm writing is, let's say that no student found for roll number exception. No student found for roll number exception. Okay, so I'm creating this class, and definitely this class is going to be the subclass of exception class. Yes or no? Definitely this class is going to be the subclass of exception class. Then here I am talking about one of the method. So I'm going to create one of the constructor. I wanted to generate the constructor from the superclass. To generate the constructor from the superclass, I am here, and I wanted to generate the constructor that is actually containing only the string message. That is actually containing only the string message. Okay. Can I say that this is a custom exception? Can I say this is a user defined exception? Definitely yes, because actually I'm defining my own exception. Okay. Let me actually write down the two cases. If I'm talking about, this is what exactly I would love to write down. This is my case number 1. This is my case number 1. And then I'm talking about the next case. Into the next case, I'm talking about inheriting the class. The name of the class is going to be the runtime exception class. If I'm talking about the runtime exception class, then I'm talking about the step number 2. I'm talking about step number 2. So everyone, if I'm talking about the first declaration and if I'm talking about the second declaration, what is the difference between them? What is the difference between them? Can anyone tell me? Case number 1, when I'm creating a subclass of exception class. Case number 2, when I'm creating a subclass of runtime exception class. Okay, let me simplify the question. Can you please tell me which one is checked exception and which one is unchecked exception? Just one by one. Okay. Case number 1. It is checked exception or unchecked exception? First statement, is it checked exception or it is unchecked exception? When I'm creating a subclass of exception class, so I'm asking, is it going to be a checked exception or unchecked exception? Okay, case number 2, when I'm creating a subclass of runtime exception class, then is it going to be a checked exception or unchecked exception? Situation is critical, batch. Situation is critical. Most of the answers are incorrect. Oh, did you remember that hierarchy? That there is one class available called the throwable class. Below the throwable class, there is one class available exception class and one more class is available that is called error class. If I'm talking about the exception class, then below the exception class, one more class is available that is called the runtime exception class. I hope that you all remember that throwable class is parent class of all type of exceptions. Yes or no? The throwable class is parent class of all type of exception. Remember this line? Yes, it is. Then if I'm talking about the exception class, then about the exception class, keep in mind that exception class and its subclasses are always talking about the checked exception. If I'm talking about the exception class and its subclasses, they are representing the checked exception. If I'm talking about the error and its subclasses, then the error and its subclasses are actually representing the fatal error that ultimately lead to crashing of the program. Ultimately, because they are going to lead to crashing of the program, you are actually not capable to do anything. So definitely there is no logic of keeping such exception as checked exception. That's why error and its subclasses are not representing checked exception. They are actually representing unchecked exception. Is that okay? But if I'm talking about the runtime exception class, then the runtime exception class is a subclass of exception class, but it is also not representing checked exception. It is also representing unchecked exception. Is that okay? It is also representing unchecked exception. Clear? That's nice. That's nice. That's nice. So everyone, we are talking about throwable, we are talking about exception, we are talking about checked exception, runtime exception. So now this time this hierarchy is clearly provided to you. Now this hierarchy when I'm writing in front of you, so please tell me option number 1, choice number 1, checked exception or unchecked exception? Choice number 1, checked exception or unchecked exception? Now you can clearly say cheat sheet is available in front of you. It is very good. Still correct, incorrect answer I am finding. Still I am finding incorrect answers. So if I'm talking about the case number 1, then definitely the case number 1 is going to be a checked exception. But if I'm talking about the case number 2, when I'm talking about the subclass of runtime exception class, then this is going to be a unchecked exception. Clear everyone? Is that okay? Now actually often a question arises that when actually we were going through the DAO pattern, Then into the DAO pattern, since the day one, we are told one thing, that create a subclass of exception class, and you should throw this exception from DAO layer to service layer, from service layer to UI layer. Perfectly okay, no problem. But this time, I'm just asking a one question to you. Can I say that this time actually your methods that you have defined in the controller, these methods will be actually called via the web client, and such that the web client says that I am actually expecting a JSON response. I don't know whether the API is created using Java or Python or .NET or PHP or anything else. Yes or no? If I'm talking about REST API, then definitely the REST API will be accessed by some application, because the REST API is actually going to be accessed by some application. So in this condition, always keep one thing in mind, everyone. First of all, REST API says that I am independent to any language. The REST API can be created using any programming language. So in this condition, everyone, let's say that if you are trying to throw the checked exception, then can't I say that checked exception is something that is a core concept of Java? It is not a concept of actually REST API. Exception is not a response of REST API. Simple actually, in case of a REST API, you have to return the response. If there is any problem available, then you have to return the response with the suitable HTTP status code. Getting my point? Ultimately, your response is required to be a JSON response. It should not be a Java object. It should not be a Java exception. According to this principle, everyone, if you are talking about throwing the checked exception, then don't you think that throwing the checked exception is nonsense in case of REST API? Because actually you are tightly coupling your REST API with the Java, such that REST API can be created using any language, and the user of the REST API is never bothered about what language you are using to create the REST API. Make sense? So simple logic. In case of REST API, what is the better choice? Throwing the checked exception or throwing the unchecked exception? Actually, throwing the unchecked exception from the controller method is a better choice, because nobody is actually responsible for handling unchecked exception. On the other hand, if I'm talking about the checked exception, then definitely checked exception will be actually or must be handled by the caller. Getting my point? The checked exception is one that must be handled by the caller of the method. But in case of unchecked exception, nobody is responsible. If somebody wanted to handle, then well and good. If somebody do not wanted to handle, then there is no problem. It is going to work 100%. Okay, clear? Shall I proceed further? So if I'm talking about the throwing the unchecked exception, then in case of REST API, it is not recommended. So in case of REST API, it is actually not good to create or not good to actually throw checked exception. Is that okay? Now going to the next part. Okay, one exception is created. Now I'm talking about the controller. And to the controller, I am coming to the controller. This time, everyone, let's say that if the list dot size equal to 0. If I'm talking about the list dot size equal to 0, in this condition, last time in the response entity, actually I was doing something. The thing that actually I was doing is simple. I was actually creating the student object, and I was throwing in the form of response entity. But this time I am not going to do this job. Simple thing that actually I am going to do is, everyone, let's say that I am writing throw new, and thereafter I'm throwing the exception. The name of the exception I am writing is no student found for the roll number exception. Into the no student found for the roll number exception. Into the no student found for the roll number exception, let's say that I am writing that no student found for roll number plus no student found for roll number plus roll. Is that okay? No student found for roll number roll. So this time, actually, instead of returning a dummy response, we are actually throwing the exception. So let's see what is the response when actually we are throwing the exception. Let's see what is the response when actually we are throwing the exception. So let me run this application. To run this application as a Spring Boot application, Alt Shift XB is what I'm pressing. And after pressing Alt Shift XB, now the application is started. Init method is called. I'm going to open the Postman, and into the Postman, I'm going to hit the URL. So initially I'm going to hit the URL, that is localhost colon 8080/student/1. So let me come to the postman, and after coming to the postman, I'm selecting the request type, that is get, clicking on the send button. And when I am clicking on the on the send button, then actually you can see that a student for the given roll number is provided to me. First output is clear. It is normal output, same as what we have done yesterday. Then talking about the next part, this time let's say I'm talking about some roll number, and the roll number that I'm writing is 100. So my question to you, do we are having any roll number, any student with the roll number 100? Do we have any student with the roll number 100? No. If we do not have any roll number with any student with the roll number 100, and then if I click on the send button, then you can see that some terrible, very big output is available for us. And if I'm talking about this terribly big output, then into this terribly big output, I'm going to filter something. First of all, everyone, can you see that timestamp is available that actually shows at what time exactly exception takes place? Yes, it is. This time is available according to the standard GMT standard time, that is Greenwich Mean Time. It is according to Greenwich Mean Time. Then you can say that status, the status code that actually we are receiving is 500. Then it is showing the error message, and the error message is available, that is called internal server error. And thereafter actually we are getting the message what type of exception it is, and then actually lot of complete log is available there. So first question I'm asking you this time, is that server related issue if a student is not found? Definitely not. Definitely not. Server is working perfectly, but if some resource is not available, then what is the fault of the server? If I'm talking about the standard response, then standard response can be 400, that is the bad request, or a standard response should be 404, that is resource not found. Getting my point? A standard response should be so. This is what exactly the default exception handling mechanism of the Spring. Because right now in this condition, I have not written even a single line of code to handle the exception. Has I ever mentioned try catch block? Has I mentioned any annotation? Answer is no. I have not created anything. When I have not created anything, so first question arises, sir, who is actually handling the exception? So if I'm talking about who is actually handling the exception, so Spring class itself provide a exception handler, and the name of the exception handler is actually represented by basic error controller. This is represented by basic error controller. What exactly this basic error controller is? This basic error controller is basic global error controller that is rendering error attribute. More specific errors can be handled either using Spring MVC exception or by adding a servlet server page. Not a big deal, not a big deal. But mainly if I'm talking about the pointer, if anybody is asking you which class is responsible for handling the exception in Spring Boot, which class is responsible for handling the exception in the Spring Boot, then can you simply answer that basic error controller class is available that is responsible for handling the exception. By default, how it is handling the exception? Always we are going to get internal server error HTTP status code 500. This is what by default Spring Boot is doing. Is that okay? Is that okay? What actually Spring is doing? By default, your exceptions are handled by the basic error controller, and always you are going to end up with the 500 status code that is called internal server error. All that things that I discussed to you, they are already mentioned in the notes. Those who have gone through the notes, they must be finding it easy. See, very first line is available. By default, Spring Boot provide a basic error controller. That is a controller for /error mapping that handle all the exception that occur in our request handler method. The controller actually produces a JSON response with the detail of the error, the HTTP status, and the exception message. And you can see that if we are talking about the default response status, then definitely the default response status code is going to be 500. The default response status is going to be 500. So here actually the point to be discussed here is everyone. First point, the by default Spring Boot actually provide a basic error controller for /error mapping that handles all the exception that occur in the request handler method. Thereafter, I'm talking about the next part. The next part that actually I'm talking to you is going to be that the controller produces a JSON response with the details of the error, the HTTP status, and the exception message. The default response status code is going to be always 500. The default status code is going to be always 500. Okay. First question, are you happy with this response? Are you happy with this default behavior? Definitely no. Definitely no. Now the question arises that, sir, how exactly to handle such kind of exceptions? So I will say that to customize the response or to customize the exception handling, there are actually two ways available. First of all, create a method in controller to handle the exception. Create a method in controller to handle the exception. Second method is also available that I will talk to you. But first of all, I'm talking about creating a method in controller to handle the exception. So right now, if I'm talking about the name of the controller is going to be student controller. Into the student controller, now what exactly I'm going to do, I'm going to create a method, and the name of the method, you can put anything. But first of all, everyone, this method should be annotated with this method must be annotated with a annotation. The name of the annotation is actually called the exception handler annotation. The method must be annotated with an annotation. The annotation is called @exception handler annotation. And here you have to specify the name of the class. The name of the class is going to be no student found for roll number exception dot class. Is that okay? This was the very first step that you have to do. You have to create a method such that the method must be annotated with @exception handler annotation, and within the exception handler annotation you have to specify the exception class name with dot class extension that you wanted to handle. Is that okay, everyone? What is the use of @exception handler annotation is? Then I'm creating a method. Uh, isn't it reasonable to say that, sir, whatever response we are getting, the response must be available in the form of response entity? Isn't it reasonable to say that the response must be available in the form of response entity? So for example, let's say that name of the method that I'm writing is going to be, let's say that get exception for no student, by roll number. This is what exactly I am writing. And this time you will see one beauty, that automatically whenever exception is going to be generated, automatically object of the exception will be provided to this method by the Spring container. Clear? The value for the parameter will be provided by the Spring container automatically because exception object is created here. Once the exception object is created here, then definitely Spring container is already aware that yes, some exception is there. Who is going to handle the exception? This method is going to handle the exception. How you come to know this method will handle the exception? This annotation actually tell me. How exactly we will get the detail of the exception? Spring container say that you create a method with the parameter. I will provide the exception object as an argument directly to this method. Is that clear? You just create a method that is annotated with @exception handler. In the @exception handler, you have to provide the name of the class with dot class. Then you have to create the method, and within this method, you have to write down no student found exception or whatever be name of your classes. First of all, you don't have to call this method. Spring container will automatically call this method in case of exception. When Spring container is automatically calling this method, so it will automatically provide object of the exception for you. Is that okay? Yes, it is. So now what exactly I'm going to do? I'm going to create an object of the response entity. When I'm creating the object of the response entity, so here I am writing that ex.getMessage. And thereafter, if I'm talking about the HTTP status, then I'm writing HTTP status dot bad request. I'm returning the response. The response is called actually HTTP bad request. Now shall I try once? Now shall we try once? Yes, it is. So let me relaunch this application. Let me relaunch this application. When I'm relaunching this application, thereafter, again, I'm coming back, and again, after coming back, let's say that I'm available here. In case of valid request, first of all, check if the code is working properly or not for the valid request. So the code is working perfectly for the valid request. Thereafter, if I'm talking about the 100, then I'm clicking on the send button. Can you see this time I'm getting a better, neat and clean response along with the proper status code? Is that okay? So this is what exactly how you can handle the exception. This is how exactly you can handle the exception. So you can see that in order to handle the exception and change the default status code to 500 to error specific status code, we need to define actually another method inside the controller class and annotate this method with @exception handler annotation. We have to actually define the what to do. The very first thing that we have to do is we have to define actually another method inside the controller class and annotate this method with @exception handler annotation. Thereafter, everyone, you can see that automatically @exception handler annotation name of the class is there. Whatever code you are writing, actually you can write down. Whatever writing you can directly write down. Then actually define a method that is annotated inside the controller class. So if I'm talking about exception handler is something we have to write down, then definitely we have to mention exception class name dot class. And after writing this thing, then we are writing public response entity into the response entity. Let's say I'm writing a string. It can be any type. It can be any type. Thereafter, actually, you have to create the method name. The method name can be any. And within this method name, the object of exception class name will be automatically provided. Okay. This approach is clear? Yes or no? Is this approach clear for all? Yes, it is. That's nice. So overall calling, etc., everything will be maintained by the Spring container itself. You don't have to worry. I don't have to worry. This is not our headache to think about the same. This is not our headache to think about the same. So annotation for handling exception in a specific handler class and or handler method. Handler methods, which are annotated with this annotations are allowed to be very flexible signature. They may have parameters of the following types in arbitrary order. The first thing, they can contain the exception argument. First thing, they can contain the exception argument declared as a general exception or a more specific exception. This also serves as a mapping hint if the annotation itself does not narrow the exception type through its value. You may refer to top level exception being populated or to the nested cause with the wrapper class. Well, okay, second, request or response object can also be provided here. Request or response object can also be provided here. You may choose any specific request response type. It can be of servlet request type, it can be of HTTP servlet request type, or it can be of web request type, or it can be of web request type. So this is the second parameter. First parameter, exception object. Second parameter is going to be an object. Third thing, you can pass the session object also. Typically, jakarta.servlet.http.http session. An argument of this type will enforce the presence of corresponding session. As a consequences, such as argument will never be null. Note that session object may be something. Apart from that, you can see that web request is there, local is there. Lot of arguments actually you can specify. What exactly it can return? It can return the model and view object, not in your scope. Model object, again, not in your scope. It can return a map also. It can return a view also. It can return a string also. It can return the response body also. It can return the HTTP entity also. And when it can return the HTTP entity, then definitely it can return the response entity also. So can I say this annotation is actually very, very flexible? Using a single annotation, you can do n number of jobs or n number of operations is simply what actually you can do. Thereafter, everyone, so here actually I am talking about the one more URL into the URL output for http colon localhost student slash 100. In case of student slash 100, we are writing the part that is going to be no student found for the roll number 100. Is that okay? Is that okay? Clear? Okay. So this is the first approach actually available about the annotation. You can directly read about the detail. So I'm actually mentioning the exception handler, Spring Boot, Spring Boot annotation. Directly, I used to refer to the standard documentation. So exception handling in MVC. No, this is actually very old block, but exception handler annotation, Spring Boot documentation. Yeah, finally, I found it. So this URL is also pasted here. You can read the detail from here. First approach we have done. Now just one simple thing that I'm asking you. For example, let's say that if I am having 20 controllers, in all the 20 controllers, if I am going to handle the no student found exception for the 20 times, will it be reasonable to write down the same code for the 20 times? Simple logic. Let's say I'm having 20 controllers. In the 20 controllers, let's say that method is always throwing the exception. The name of the exception is no student found for roll number exception. If we are finding no student found for the roll number exception in such condition, what do you think? Will it be reasonable to write down the same thing for the 20 times? Answer is no. Answer is no. So definitely in this approach, actually see, the thing is that actually creating the method, see, the thing is already mentioned into the notes also. The thing is already mentioned inside the notes also. The thing is that everyone, the above exception handler method will be applicable for same controller class only which it is defined. If we wanted to apply the exception handler method for the multiple controller of the application, then we will ultimately end up with duplicacy of the code, or our code is actually going to be a wet code. Our code is actually going to be a wet code. So we wanted to apply the exception handler for multiple applications. Then in this approach, we have to copy this method for all controller, which actually makes the code wet, which actually make the code wet. Wet actually stands for write everything twice, and this is actually not a recommended approach. So what is the better approach? So if I'm talking about the solution, then definitely solution is to use a common, or you can say that solution is to use a, you can say that global exception handler. Getting my point, everyone? The solution is available that we have to use the global exception handler. How to create the global exception handler? In case of global exception handler, you have to create a separate class, and the separate class should be annotated with @controller advice annotation. What you have to do? You have to actually create a separate class that is actually annotated with @controller advice annotation. And what you have to do, then you have to define the method to handle the exception inside this class. Method to handle the exception inside this class. Is that okay, everyone? You have to create a class. Let's say that your name of class can be any. Your name of class can be any. For example, let's say that the name of the class that I'm writing is going to be global exception handler class. What I have to do, this class has to be annotated with the controller advice annotation. And when it is annotated with the controller advice annotation, so whatever method that actually you were creating there, whatever method you were creating separately in every controller, this time, this time, this time, this time, this time, you don't have to take care automatically. This method will work for all controllers. So don't you think this is very much like a centralized approach? Don't you think this is very much like a centralized approach? And definitely this is flexible also. Why flexible also? Because it gives us full control over the body of the response. It provides mapping of the several exception to the same method. It is good for RESTful response entity. One thing to keep in mind that exception declared in @exception handler to the exception is used in the method. Just one thing. Almost all the pointers we have already covered. So this time, everybody, what exactly I'm going to do, the thing that actually I'm going to do is I have to use @controller advice annotation. I have to use @controller advice annotation. Is that point okay? Is that point okay? So let me actually convert this example. This time, everyone, this approach is actually not a recommended solution. So I am actually keeping this in the form of comment, and I'm writing this is not a recommended approach, yet it is working approach. This is working, but not a recommended approach. This is not a recommended approach to handle the exception. So what should I do? The thing that I should do is I should go to the exception package. Into the exception package, I am going to create a class. The name of the exception class that I am writing is going to be global exception handler. the name of the class that actually I'm going to write down is going to be global exception handler class. Onto the global exception handler class, the very first thing that I need to write down is one annotation. The name of the annotation is called @controller advice annotation. And after writing the controller advice annotation, let me copy this code, pasting this code. The first line is actually not useful for me, but the remaining lines, they are useful. So the code is created. The code is created here. Is that okay? Shall I execute this example again to see if it is working or not? Shall I execute this example again to check if it is working or not? Yes, we can do that. So let me actually comment the additional lines, or better to press Ctrl Shift O. All the imports are adjusted. Let me run the same application again. Alt Shift XB is what exactly I am writing. After writing the Alt Shift XB, then talking about the next portion, and the next portion is, yeah, again, I'm going here. First of all, try to handle a proper request. So the proper request is working perfectly. When I'm writing 100, clicking on the send method, then can you see we are getting the same output? Can you see that we are getting the same output? Yes or no? So please tell me which approach is better, approach number 1 or approach number 2? Everyone, please submit your response. Which approach is better, approach number 1 or approach number 2? Definitely approach number 2 is a better solution, because you are having actually better control over the exceptions. You are having actually better control over the exception. Similarly, that everyone, if I'm talking about this method, then this method is actually not useful. This method is actually not useful. Thereafter. So yeah, this is how exactly exception handling is working. Now let me discuss some more pointers to you about the exception handling in case of Spring. First of all, everyone, which type of exception should we throw? Shall we throw checked exception? Shall we throw unchecked exception? So definitely in this condition, it is always good to throw the unchecked exception. First point is okay. Second number point, shall we throw the predefined exception or shall we create the custom exceptions? Then don't you think that it is always good to create the custom exceptions, because they are specific to our applications? Because they are specific to our application, we can later on customize them according to our choice. So definitely it will actually offer us loose coupling. Yes or no? It will actually offer us loose coupling. This is always one thing you should keep into mind. Second thing is that everyone, you can see that there is one note available. And to the note, one thing is mentioned here, that we should not handle the exception of the request handler method inside the try catch block. Instead, we should let the Spring Boot handle that exception and generate a error response. And generate a error response in the form of JSON object with an appropriate error status code, so that client can use status code and display the appropriate result. Clear, everyone? Why actually I return response entity? This is according to same convention. This is according to same convention. The above exception handler method will be applicable for the same controller class only in which it is defined. If we want to apply the exception handler method for multiple controller of application, we should define that method inside a separate class and annotate that class using @control advice annotation, controller advice annotation. Then everyone, the class annotated with @controller advice annotation is called global exception handler. Same thing is actually done here. You should always use the custom exception. And see, one more line is available. It is always recommended to throw or own domain specific custom exceptions class instead of throwing predefined layer or technology specific exception classes to achieve the loose coupling among the different layer. This is the same thing that we are doing in the DAO pattern also. Don't you think this is the same thing that actually we were doing in case of the DAO pattern also? Remember, in the DAO pattern, you were never throwing the SQL exception. You were throwing the exception like something went wrong exception. You were throwing the exception very much like no record found exception. Did you remember? Same convention we have to follow here. Same convention we have to follow here. Okay. So this is one example that actually we have taken. Now, everyone, if you wanted to customize the response in the user defined format, what is the mean of customizing the response in the form of user defined response? So just take a look at one example. This time, everyone, if I'm talking about the output that I'm getting, is that output a JSON object or it is a plain Java plain string value? Option 1 or option 2? Simple question I am asking, is that a JSON object or it is a plain string output? Definitely it is a plain string output, which is again something that is not recommended, because we should always get the response in the form of JSON object. Yes or no? Okay, so now what exactly I wanted to do? I wanted to customize this message such that I wanted to get a JSON object. Into the JSON object, actually, I wanted to get the three things. The very first thing that actually I wanted to get is called the timestamp. The second thing that I wanted to get is the error message. And the third thing that I wanted to get is the URI in which actually the exception is generated. Take a look at the chat, please. My message for everyone. Take a look at the chat, please, for the message that I have written for everyone. So can I say this time actually I wanted to provide the three information, and to provide the three information there is no other choice available than to create a Java class? Yes or no? There is no choice available other than to create a Java class. Yes, it is. So now the next portion that actually I'm going to tell you that how to customize the error messages. So if I'm talking about to customization of the error messages, then I'm going to take one more example. I'm going to take one more example in which I will show you how we can customize. So into the last example number 21, into the controller, I have created a method, and the method is to search the students by their marks range. To search the student by their marks range. So for example, let's say that I am actually copying the same example, and after copying the same example, I am writing here. So this method is to find the student for a given marks range. Get method is there. I'm using the request parameter, two parameter start and stop, and is what exactly I have to pass. URL pattern is also available here. Searching logic is also available here. This time everyone, can I say that if the list dot size equal to 0, then instead of throwing an exception, what problem I'm doing? What problem I'm doing? Exactly, I am returning an empty array list, which is not a recommended choice. Yes or no? Yes, it is. Don't you think that it will be better to throw an exception? Yes, it is. So this time everyone, last time I have created one exception class. The name of the exception class is no student found for roll number exception. Can I create one more exception class that is no student for given marks range? Can I create one more that is no student for given marks range? No students for given marks range exception. So when I'm writing no student found for the given marks range exception, in this condition, I can see one thing this time. Again. So the name of the class is actually no student found for given marks range exception, spelling mistake. Extends runtime exception, message, etc. is available as it is. Just pressing F2 and refactoring GIVEN. Yeah, no student found for the given marks range exception. So this time when I'm talking about the no student found for the given marks range exception, so this time, instead of actually returning the response, it will be good to throw new. The name of the exception is going to be new no student found for the given marks range exception. The message is actually no student found. No student is actually no student has scored marks between plus start and plus E and D. Is that okay? No scholar has scored the marks between this and that. Now, this time, what is my target? My target is not to return the response in the form of a string. My target is not to return the response in the form of a string. I do not want it to do that. No, this is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to return a proper response. I want to return a proper response. So actually on this part, I have done. On this part, I have done. Now what exactly I'm going to do? So again, I'm going to global exception handler. When exactly I'm going to on the global exception handler. Again, I'm creating the exception handler. Into the exception handler, then I'm writing this is going to be no student found for the given marks range exception dot class. When I'm writing that is no student found for the given marks range exception class, again response entity. And before actually returning anything or before writing anything about this method, just actually I'm writing here return null. And let's say initially once I'm writing here string, this is what exactly I am writing. So get exception for new no student by marks. Copy, paste, and done. See what exactly I'm going to do. First of all, I'm creating a class. The name of the class I am writing is, this is actually error details. The name of the class that actually I am writing is error details class. Into the error details, see, in the format I told you about the three things. The very first thing I told you was the timestamp. The second thing I told you was the message. And the third thing that I told you was the URI. So can I say that timestamp is going to be of local date time type? Yes or no? Can I say this is going to be of local date time type? Yes, it is. If I'm talking about the next one, can I say that the message is going to be of the string type? Yes, it is. And if I'm talking about the URI, then URI is also what I can take of the string type. Thereafter, Alt Shift S, I'm talking about the generate constructor from the superclass. I'm talking about generate constructor using the field. Then I'm talking about the generate constructor generating the getter setter method is also what exactly you can do. But initially, let me keep the discussion limited. I think parameterized constructor will be sufficient for us. If there will be anything else, then definitely we will talk. If there will be anything else, then we will talk. Now, so one class is created. The name of the class is called my error details class. See, the very first thing that I'm going to do, please tell me, can I get an object of web request here? Please tell me, can I get an object of web request here? See, when I was talking to you about the exception handler, then while discussing about the exception handler, you can say that they may have parameter of the following type in the arbitrary order. So can you find out that the web request is mentioned here? Yes or no? Everyone, please be active on chat. Everything is in front of you. Okay. What exactly this web request is? What exactly this web request is? This is a generic interface for web request, mainly intended for generic web request interceptor, giving them access to general request metadata. Giving them access to general request metadata. And if I'm talking about the method, then can you see there is one method available that is called get description method. Into the get description method, you can see that get a short description of the request that typically contain the URI and the session ID. Right now we have no discussion about the session ID. So specifically, can I say that this method is going to give me the URI? Yes or no? Okay. Apart from this, there is one parameter available that is called include client info. So right now, actually, our client is completely anonymous. We do not have any login specific mechanism. So that's why better to keep this include user info to false. Make sense? It is good to make the include client info to false. Clear, everybody? Yes, it is. So there is a request description is available in the form of a string. So what exactly I am doing? The web request is available to me. So first of all, the very first thing, create an object of error details class. Create an object of error details class. So how to create the object of the error details class? Error details ed equal to new error details. Into the error details, the very first thing that actually I'm going to write down is going to be ex dot, that is exception type dot get message is what exactly we are writing. This is the first thing that is, oh sorry, the first parameter that I need to pass is going to be the local date time. So for the local date time, everyone, can I say that directly I can call the method, the name of the method is called the local date time method. And into the local date time method, there is one method available called the now method. Did you remember? The same thing, J111, approximately day number 1213. Okay, then I wanted to get the web URI. If I wanted to get the web URI, then definitely I need to call the method, and the name of the method is called the get description method. Into the get description method, I have to provide the value that is called false. Makes sense? I have created one object. Yes or no? Yes, it is. This time session ID is not available. You can see that the return type of this method is already string. So no problem. Thereafter, actually, I can create an object of the response entity. So this time, can I say that the response entity object is going to contain the object of error details? Yes or no? This time, can I say that the object of response entity is going to contain the object of error details? So right now, what exactly I am going to do? I am writing return new. Thereafter, I am writing the one more thing that is called the response entity. And after talking about the response entity, the very first thing that actually I have to specify is the ED. And second thing I have to specify is the status code. And the status code is going to be http status dot bad request. http status code dot bad request. Is that okay? Yes, it is. So then actually one point is available. Let me try this application. What exactly output we are getting? Let me stop this application. And after this stopping this application, then again, I'm going to launch the same application again. Alt Shift XB. Alt Shift XB. Then everyone, let me come to the Postman again. Into the Postman, let's say that I'm passing this time. Okay, I was talking about the marks range. So the URL pattern that actually I wanted to hit is going to be, just a second, student controller. Let's say that I'm talking about the first case. Into the first case, hope we are getting the same output when everything is okay. Has I forgot to search by marks range? Question mark start equal to 75. Could not send the request. Oh, I think I have copied wrong URL. Yeah, working. Into the raw format, this time it is working perfectly. Two outputs are available there. Let me talk about the next case. Into the next case, for example, let's say that the value for start I am writing is 10 and value for end, let's say I am writing 45. Then I am clicking on the send message. This time I'm getting internal server error. Let me check what went wrong. First of all, everyone, what type of exception we are throwing? We are throwing the no student found for given marks range exception. When we are talking about the no student found for the given marks range exception, here it is okay. Here it is also okay. Exception handler is what exactly I am using. Response entity is okay. What went wrong? What went wrong? What went wrong? I have provided the object of web request also. Just let me check. No acceptable representation. It is showing no acceptable representation. Just a minute. Let me check what exactly went wrong. No profiling is set. Failure of the exception handler. Just a second. It is saying one thing that actually get exception for no student by marks, no student for given marks range exception and web request. So here is actually no acceptable representation is what exactly it is writing. And thereafter it says that the no student found for the given marks range exception. This is okay. Actually exception is generated, but it is unable to handle the exception. It is not able to handle the exception. Just a minute, let me check. There might be some minor error in the code that is creating this mix up. So let me check everything one by one. First of all, let me stop this. And after stopping this, the very first thing, the request will be hitted here. And once the request is hitted here, get student by marks range. Into the get student by marks range, start is there, end is there. Thereafter, we are getting the list. If the list dot size is 0, then we are actually throwing the exception, that is no student found for given marks range exception. Perfect. Perfect. Then actually, no student has scored the marks between start and the end. Thereafter, the response entity is available there. And after response entity is available there, list is there, http status dot okay is there. Thereafter, coming to the class, not quite adapter, global exception handler. Into the global exception handler, we are writing that is no student found for given marks range exception. And then we are getting this one. So there is no hierarchy. Both classes does not have any relation. This class is subclass of runtime exception class. Perfect. Method is also available. Message is also available. Why exactly? Let me actually once clean this code. After cleaning this code, let me run this application again. Right click, run as Spring Boot application. After running this in the form of a Spring Boot application, thereafter I am talking about one thing, then going here. After going here, then copy, then clicking on the start. This is working perfect. Next case, let's say that marks I am writing between 5 to 10, clicking on the send button. Again, same problem. Again, same problem. That is also okay. That is also okay. Local time dot now ex dot get message get description is also here. Let me see what exactly went wrong. It says that HTTP media type not accepted exception, no acceptable representation. Abstract message converter procedure Spring. It says that failure in @exception handler of global exception handler. In this method there is exception. Into the global exception handler, ed is okay. Yes it is. I'm creating the exception object. Yes it is. Passing the description to false. Yes it is. Let me check if it is jumping into this method or not. Let me just check if it is jumping into this method or not. If it is jumping into this method, then I wanted to get the output Z on the console. Similarly, everyone, let's say that if there is an exception available, in case of exception, I wanted to get the output A. If output is A, means actually exception object is there. If output is Z, means we are jumping into the exception handler also. Just actually doing a kind of debugging. Alt Shift X B. Let me actually hit the statement again. When I'm hitting the statement again, then actually on the console, am I getting the output A and Z? Output A is also available. Output Z is also available. Output A is also available. Output Z is also available. So output A and Z is available means actually system.out.println Z. We are here. Thereafter, I am creating the object of the error details. After creating the object of the error details, we are talking about the response entity. The response entity is containing the object of error details. Then one thing we are passing is the ed. What exactly ed is? Ed is the error details, and thereafter we are passing http status dot get message. Just a second. HTTP media type not acceptable exception. One second. Serializable interface is required, I think. Just 1 second. Let me check. Just one thing. Let me check. No, error detail is available. Local date, local time is available. Getter setter method is also available. Global exception handler is also available. And thereafter we are returning the response entity. Into the response entity we are providing the object. Then we are talking about the bad request. This is also there. Another exception, if we wanted to handle, then definitely we can handle. That is also not a big deal. No. One possible problem can be there. Is it required to create a default constructor? Just a minute. 1 second. Let me try this. I'm generating the default constructor. And after actually generating the default constructor, then let me check if it is working. Let me actually clean and build the project again. So clicking on the clean, then save. Thereafter, again, let me execute this application. So again, when I'm executing this application, thereafter we are talking to URL. The URL, again, I'm hitting, clicking on the send button. Again, there is no luck. We did not have getter setter method is one thing. So let me do one more job. I'm talking about creating the getter setter method. So Alt Shift J. Thereafter clicking on the generate. After clicking on the generate, let me actually try again. Again, I'm stopping the application, going to the project. Thereafter, I'm talking about the clean. Then again, selecting this specific project. Just a minute. Selecting this one, going to the project, going to the clean option, into the clean option. Then I'm talking about this project. Project is created again. Thereafter, I wanted to do the right click. After doing the right click, run as, then I'm talking about the Spring Boot application. And after talking about the Spring Boot application, then actually init method is there. Again, coming back to this logic. Then I'm clicking on the search. Actually, setter getter method is required internally. Setter getter method is required internally. That's why this mix-up actually takes place. Well, so overall, everyone, how to perform the customization, is that clear? How to perform the customization, is that clear? And definitely giving the customized response is always a better choice. Definitely giving the customized response is actually always a better choice. The possible reason is that actually I have created the object, but during the deserialization, getter methods are required. During the deserialization, getter methods are required. Let me do one experiment. I am actually only leaving the getter method as it is. And if I'm talking about the setter method, once actually I'm making the setter method comments. I'm commenting the setter method. Once actually setter methods are commented, let me actually rebuild this project. Thereafter, I'm talking about build automatically. After talking about the build automatically, then actually I'm going to run this application, right click, run as, then again, I'm talking about the Spring Boot application. And after talking about the running as a Spring Boot application, again, coming back to the Postman, then again, I'm clicking on the send. That's why. Actually, during the deserialization, getter methods were required. During the deserialization, getter methods were actually required. That's why. And one more thing, everyone, see, sometime it happened, let's say that I have made minor changes. Let's say that I have made minor changes, but actually your files are not getting compiled immediately by STS. So in this case, what happened? You have made changes in the code, but the changes are not applicable in the generated build file, or the changes are not applicable in the generated class file. Getting my point? So if you wanted to create the class files again from the starting, then select your project, go to the project option, click on the clean. What actually it will do, it will actually erase all the existing class files and it will create the new class file. So you can say that it is a shortcut to recompile your code entirely manually. Okay. Yet in most of the cases, STS is doing sometime. If due to minor change, you are not able to see, or you are finding that changes are not applicable, in this condition, you can go with that. Okay, everybody. Here also, I'm writing the comment that keep the getter methods as they are actually required in serialization, as they are required to convert in JSON object. Keep the getter method as they are required to keep the convert in JSON object. Today, DevTool dependency is working. Whenever I'm making any changes, it is restarting the server. Okay, so this is the one more job that actually we have done. So how to customize the error messages? Is that okay? Now, finally, everybody, let's say sometime it happen that user is actually making the typing mistake. How exactly he is making the typing mistake? So for example, let's say instead of typing the students, user is typing the URL student. Is that a valid resource? Is that a valid resource? No. Can I say this is an invalid URI? Can I say this is an invalid URI? Yes. If it is an invalid URI right now, if I'm clicking on the send button, then can you see that I'm getting the message that is 404 not found? Can you see that I'm getting the message that is called 404 not found? It is saying that timestamp is there, status is there, 404 error is there, message is there, no message is available there. Right now, I have not written even a single line of code to handle this exception. Because ultimately, when you are hitting a resource not found, so ultimately it is going to be an exception. Ultimately, it is going to be an exception. And I have not written even a single line of code to handle the exception. Right now, even I don't know what is the name of the class. So can I say that right now the exception is actually handled by basic error controller? Right now, can I say that the exception is actually handled by basic error controller? Yes or no? What happened, class? If nobody is handling the exception, then ultimately basic error controller will handle the exception. Yes, it is. So one point that you should keep into mind whenever you are actually finding yourself in such type of situation, then first of all, keep in mind, the exception will be no handler found exception. The exception is going to be no handler found exception. So what exactly the case here is that you can see that the Spring Boot by default does not map the custom exception to 404 error like not found exception class. If we try to call an invalid URI, then we need to create a different custom exception handler for the same. So I need to write down an exception handler such that the name of the exception handler is going to be no handler found exception. In the no handler found exception, I have to do all my processing. Is that okay? Is that okay? Okay, so let us try, then I will tell you something also. So for example, let's say that I wanted to create one more exception handler. Again, I wanted to write down here one thing. Again, I wanted to create one thing. Let me actually turn off because due to dependency will restart it again and again, and that panel will slightly disturb us. So for example, let's say again, I'm talking about the exception handler. And let's say that if I'm talking about the exception, then the exception that actually we wanted to handle is going to be that is no handler found exception dot class. When I'm talking about the no exception found handler dot class, thereafter I'm writing the one thing. The thing is going to be that is called the response entity into the response entity error detail. Then I'm writing get handler for no handler. Method name can be any. Method name can be any. So the first parameter is going to be no handler found exception. Second parameter is going to be the web request. Thereafter, everyone, this A, B, Z is actually not required. This was only for the debugging. Then I'm creating the object of the error class. While creating the object of the error class, I am actually doing the same job again. I'm actually doing the same job again. So this time actually you can see everyone, I have written the exception handler for the same. Once I have written the exception handler, let me run this application again. I am writing Alt Shift XB. And after writing Alt Shift XB, the init method is getting called. Now I am available on the Postman. Thereafter, I am clicking on the send button. Can't you see that it is ineffective? Can you see that this is completely ineffective? Yes or no? I have written the exception handler, but still there is no luck. Still there is no luck. Why exactly there is no luck? Because to the Spring container, I have to actually tell two more things. One of the thing is that I have to tell that yes, hello, I have configured the no exception found handler found. If there is resource not available, if there is 404 kind of situation, then to handle the 404 kind of situation, I have already created exception handler. This is what I have to tell it explicitly. And how to tell the same thing explicitly? To tell the same thing explicitly, I have to actually add a property to the properties file, that is Spring MVC dash throw exception if no handler found equal to true. Means actually I am telling to the Spring container that you throw the exception you should not handle. You throw the exception you should not handle. Actually, I have written the exception handler for the same. This is the first property that actually I have to add. Second thing I have to do is that everyone, you should not actually map any resources. And this is one more property that actually you have to add. Spring.web.resource.add mapping equal to false means you should not map. I have written the code. You should not map. I have written the code. Let me actually of this application of this application, then let me restart the same application again. After restarting the same application again, then again I'm going to my URL. Thereafter I'm clicking on the send. This time can I say it is working properly? This time can I say it is working properly? So these are the two properties that you have to configure whenever we are talking about handling no handler found exception. Whenever we are talking about that is no handler found exception dot class. Is that okay? Is that okay? Clear? Thereafter, everyone, the next part is available. That is all about the data validation. The data validation we are not going to discuss today. So request data validation in the Spring Boot REST API. Thereafter, you can see that we have to add the dependency. Some annotations are available there. And after having the annotation, let's say that if your data is not according to the given format. In this condition, ultimately, you will find another type of exception. And the another type of exception is actually called method argument not valid exception. So to learn the exception, first of all, you must actually properly understand how exactly exception handling is working. We have already taken the sufficient example. Thereafter, in the next class, we will talk about how to actually validate the data in the Spring Boot. Please make sure to read the notes. And once we are completing this, then we will talk about the Spring Data JPA. Have you gone through the Hibernate in the previous classes? Have you gone through the Hibernate in the previous classes? Persistent context, entity manager factory, persist method, merge method, find by ID method, delete, remove method, entity lifecycle, transient state, persist state, persist, that is called manage state. Apart from the manage state, there was detach state and there is remove state. 4 states were available. Association mapping, have you done? Association mapping. One to many, many to one, many to many relationship. Yes, it is. Inheritance mapping. Inheritance mapping done. Make sure to revise entire Hibernate in this weekend. Otherwise, Spring Data JPA is going to be very tough for you. Getting my point? Otherwise, Spring Data JPA is going to be very, very tough for you. And your IA has already covered association mapping in the last stand-up. So please make sure to revise each and everything. Spring Data JPA we will do very quickly because it is completely based on Hibernate. Nothing special is there. Nothing special is there. So everyone, it's time for the leap session. It is time for the leap session. So just a second, actually, this is time for the leap session. And actually into the later. Yeah. Here, everyone. First of all, I'm talking about presentation. Everybody comfortable with the reactor framework? Everybody comfortable with the reactor framework? R is for repeat. E is for example. Remember, A is for approach. C is for coding. T is for testing. And O is for optimization. So almost same thing is going to be there for the sprint number 2. See, today we will discuss about the live class coding interview. Into the live class coding interview, definitely you have to follow reactor framework. Why never jump on the code directly? First of all, explain your approach to the interviewer. So even if your code is getting failed, or let's say that even if you are not able to write down the entire code, still you will not be in the trouble. At least actually the interviewer will come to know that yes, you are comfortable with concept, you are having good problem solving skill, but right now you are not capable to write down the code in a specific programming language. That's why never jump on the code directly. Think about the edge cases, etc., etc. Reactor is for repeat the question, E is for the example, A is for the approach, C is for the code, T is for the testing, O is for the optimization. Examples already you have multiple time gone through, and again you have to use the ChatGPT primer link, and leap submission form will be shared to you. Leap submission form will be shared to you. Anybody wanted to ask anything for the reactor? Anybody wanted to ask anything regarding reactor? If no, type 1 on chat. If no, then please type 1 on chat. That's nice. That's nice. That's nice. So if I'm talking about if I'm talking about the primer link, then I'm going to share the primer link to you. And one very strongly required announcement is that everyone, please keep one thing into the mind that you have to keep your screen shared. You have to keep your screen shared. This is a form link that you have to fill after. Right now on the chat, I have actually provided the form link that you have to fill after interview is completed. Now I'm going to share the primer link to you. So into the primer link, just a second, 2 primer link are available. One link is available for in class and the another link is available that you have to do in the assignment. Another link is that you have to do in the assignment. So everyone, ChatGPT primer link is shared to you. Please click on this and do let me know if it is working or not. I have already opened this in front of you. Is that link working? Yes, it is. That's good. Now I am stopping my screen sharing. Now I am stopping my screen sharing. I am enabling the screen sharing for all. I have enabled screen sharing for all. You people are requested to please share your screen. I have stopped my screen sharing. You people are requested to share your screen. Now I am keeping myself on mute. My camera is off. Mode of communication will be chat. Make sure to share the screen, everyone.
ask the first question. Okay, so I understand. So the first question is explain what is the persistent library JPL and its significance in the backend development. So